The following presentation examines the events of January 1861 from a Grand Theater perspective. It is now 2 months since the election of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's inauguration is not until March. President James Buchanan is in his final months in office. However, South Carolina has already seceded from the Union in December, and it is widely anticipated that other slave states in the Deep South will soon follow. New Year's Day, 1861. There is great uncertainty in the nation. All eyes remain transfixed on South Carolina, which is a self-declared independent nation. We will zoom into Charleston, South Carolina. On January 1st, South Carolina militia controls Castle Pickney and Fort Moultrie. The United States garrison under Major Robert Anderson at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor is isolated and surrounded. On January 2nd, South Carolina militia secures Fort Johnson. Rumors swirl in southern newspapers that Anderson's garrison at Fort Sumter will soon run out of provisions. We will zoom back out. The dust is still settling from recently disgraced Secretary of War John Floyd's suspicious arms transfers and his attempt to turn over Charleston's defenses to the rebels. Editorials have harsh words for President Buchanan. On January 3rd, the Jeffersonian, published in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, states that President Buchanan authorized a traitorous policy of leaving the Charleston Harbor forts in an ungarrisoned condition so that they might become an easy prey to the rebels. By now, it's revealed that Buchanan's cabinet had quarreled over Fort Sumter. Northern newspapers are increasingly pairing President Buchanan's administration with the word traitor. Also on January 3rd, in Tallahassee, Florida, a secession convention considers following South Carolina in withdrawing from the Union. January 4. In New York City, there is activity on the steamship Star of the West. The New York Dispatch noted that the steamship was being coaled up yesterday with unusual celerity. Large gangs of men were employed to get on board 160 tons of coal in the shortest possible period of time. The supposition is that she is to be sent on some mission by the government, but of what character or where is not yet known. The action of state militia securing United States supplies is now spreading beyond South Carolina. On January 5th at Mobile, Alabama militia secure Fort Morgan and Fort Gaines. Also on January 5th, the Star of the West departs New York City on its secret mission. January 9, Mississippi secedes from the Union. There are now 2 states that are no longer in the United States. In addition, in Montgomery, Alabama, the Alabama Convention proposes to hold a conference of southern states in Montgomery to coordinate the mission and goals of the slave states. A critical event happens on January 9th in Charleston. We will zoom into Charleston Harbor. On January 9th, what may be the first shots of the Civil War are fired in Charleston Harbor. The steamer, the Star of the West, is arriving from New York City. Her secret mission is revealed: to bring supply and 200 reinforcements to besieged Fort Sumter. But from about 5/8 of a mile distant, cannon fire sounds from Morris Island and then from Fort Moultrie. The Star of the West is forced to depart. Anderson's garrison at Fort Sumter is too isolated to respond. The Star of the West turns back. Fort Sumter receives no aid. Lieutenant Hall of Fort Sumter, bearing a flag of truce, crosses the harbor to Charleston to meet with Governor Francis Pickens of South Carolina. Major Anderson's communication with Governor Pickens ran as follows: Sir, 2 of your batteries fired this morning on an unarmed vessel bearing the flag of my government. I am not notified that war has been declared by South Carolina against the United States, and I cannot think that this hostile act was committed without your sanction or authority. Under that hope, I refrained from opening fire upon your batteries. Governor Pickens sent a reply to Major Anderson, stating that any attempt to send United States troops to Charleston Harbor or reinforce their defenses would be regarded as an act of hostility. The governor of South Carolina tells Major Anderson that his actions are entirely justified. On the same day, in Norfolk, Virginia, the Navy sloop Brooklyn had already set sail to assist the Star of the West at Charleston. At this stage, Virginia's ports are in operation for the United States. The next day, January 10th, Florida joins Mississippi and South Carolina in secession. On the same day at Baton Rouge, Louisiana, militia seize Fort Jackson and Fort St. Philip. January 11, Alabama becomes the fourth state to secede. Meanwhile, the USS Brooklyn is approaching Charleston. Newspapers are speculating that the ship's presence will cause the rebels to respond with fire, and a general engagement will ensue between the ship, Fort Sumter, and Charleston defenses. The next day, January 12th, in Pensacola, Florida, the United States Commodore James Armstrong at the Navy Yard finds himself in a similar position to Robert Anderson at Fort Sumter. We will zoom into Pensacola. Pensacola has a large airfield today that it obviously didn't have in 1861, so I've removed that feature. Like Charleston, Pensacola is a well-fortified coastal city. Fort Barrancas is here. Fort McCree is here. Fort Pickens is here. The Navy Yard is here. Fort McCree has already been occupied by Florida militia. James Armstrong, the United States Navy commander at Pensacola, instructs the USS Wyandotte at Pensacola that, should an attack be made, you will not fire a gun unless it may actually be necessary in defense of that vessel under your command. In the event of the capture of the fort, you will proceed immediately to the station to which you have been ordered by the Navy Department. It is reported that this yard is surrounded by armed men. Indeed, later that day on January 12th, the issue is forced at Pensacola. Fort Barrancas and the Navy Yard are seized by Alabama and Florida militia. Commodore Armstrong is taken prisoner and later released. Fort Pickens, just off Pensacola, however, remains in United States control, an offshore U.S. fort now in a similar situation to Fort Sumter. We will zoom back out. January 13. In Washington, General Winfield Scott positions United States troops to keep peace in the capital. January 19. Georgia secedes from the Union by a vote of 208 to 89, the fifth state to leave the Union. The Muscatine Weekly Journal reports that on this day, 100 kegs of powder and 2,000 pounds of shot and shell are shipped from Richmond, Virginia, to the rebel state government in South Carolina. January 21. In Washington, senators from Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi formally withdraw from Congress. Among the resigning senators is Jefferson Davis. Also on January 21st, in Louisville, Kentucky, the State House of Representatives passed a resolution that declared Kentucky will resist any United States invasion of its state's territory. On January 26th, Louisiana secedes from the Union by a vote of 113 to 17, the sixth state to join the rebellion. The ring of secession now extends from South Carolina west to Louisiana. The deep cotton-growing South is all in the fold. The departure of Louisiana raises a critical issue for the United States. Louisiana is the mouth of the Mississippi River, and New Orleans is one of the largest cities in the nation. The usage and navigation of the Mississippi River, one of the major transportation avenues in the continent, is now in question. Also on January 26th, in Savannah, Georgia, Fort Jackson is seized by Georgia militia. Fort Pulaski, also at Savannah, is by this time also in the hands of Georgia militia. January 28. In Washington, former War Secretary Floyd is indicted by a grand jury, including a charge for conspiracy against the government. However, Mr. Floyd has fled to Virginia. January 29. In this era of secession, the Union will gain a state. Kansas is officially the 34th state to enter the Union, coming in as a free soil state. However, with 6 states now seceded, she is among the 28 states currently remaining in the Union, the loyal states including California and Oregon on the West Coast. In Illinois, the Springfield Journal noted that Mr. Lincoln is urging conciliation and compromise, but that he will refrain from public statements until the electoral vote is counted in Congress in February. By this date, The USS Brooklyn is instructed not to enter Charleston or Pensacola, as that would initiate a confrontation. Thus, at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, Major Anderson is essentially unreachable, as any United States ship entering the harbor will be seen as a direct escalation. The same is true for the U.S. garrison remaining at Fort Pickens in Pensacola. In Washington, Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky is still leading efforts to find a compromise and avert a crisis. Many are hopeful that Virginia and the Upper South will remain loyal to the United States. Also in Washington at this time, there are rumors of conspiracies against the new president. However, General Winfield Scott is taking all precautions to ensure the capital will be safe for Lincoln's inauguration. Down in New Orleans, Louisiana, a convention is in session to elect delegates for the Montgomery Convention. The states in rebellion are in the process of electing delegates for the convention to be held in Montgomery, Alabama, in February, where they plan to establish a constitution for the Southern Confederacy. Jefferson Davis is already in prominent consideration for the presidency of this new Confederacy. But the North strikes back. In Washington, new bills are brought to the Senate. With the Deep South now out of Congress, Northern senators now go on the offensive. Senator King of New York calls to employ volunteers to protect public property. Senator Wilson of Massachusetts introduces a bill for the better organization of the militia at the Capitol. Senator Bingham of Michigan proposes to repeal the fugitive slave law. Senator Wilkinson of Minnesota proposes to curtail railroad funding along the southern route. On January 31st, the Chicago Tribune noted, "This may be regarded as the turning week of secession movements, and unless some action in behalf of compromise measures is made before Virginia votes, it is feared she will go in favor of secession, and in the hope of saving the Union quietly will be greatly weakened." January 1861 revealed the widening crisis of secession. On New Year's Day, one state, South Carolina, was out of the Union. However, by January 31st, 6 states had left, and all indications are that more slave states will soon join the fold.